Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from a brewer from whom we've had a few beers in the past several years, but it's been at least a couple since we have reviewed one of their beers, and that is Stave Artisan Beer Project. Kind of a long name, but it is what it is. Today's beer in question is called Nightmare on Brett. It is a dark sour ale clocking in at 9.6% ABV. This one has been whiskey barrel aged, specifically in Leopold Brothers whiskey barrels. Stave Artisan Beer Project is based in Denver, Colorado. So, big bottle today. Label art on this, don't know how best to describe it. The camera may or may not pick it up well. It looks like the skull of some kind of animal above the name Nightmare on Brett. Very clean design, very cool, kind of dark and mysterious on this big bottle here. So we're using our nice little tulip glass. My Delirium Tremens glass works great for sours. Let's just get this cracked gently. All right, and poured right into the glass. I can already smell it just from cracking the top off. So pouring it in, yes, dark sour ale. These are not as common, but they do exist. I'll never forget what a visceral reaction I had the first time that I ordered a sour from a bar and it came out poured brown. I was taken aback. That's been years, but yeah, they're far less common. But yes, of course, you can sour any beer style. Very pungent aroma on this beer. I can smell it from a good, almost pushing a foot and a half away. So, this is a sour, but it actually formed what looks like a creamy head on top. Not super thick, but it did form one. So before that completely dissipates and just leaves cling on the side, I am going to start with the aroma. Let's just jump right over. Oh yeah. Wow, okay. So there's a huge ton of information happening on that nose. You immediately can smell the pungency of the tart and the sour on this beer. It is a Brettanomyces beer, of course, and it does indeed impart some of those classic tutti frutti aromas that you experience typically on a Brettanomyces sour. It smells very nice, but it is also whiskey barrel aged, and you also get the whiskey in there. So it's a combination of aromas you don't often get together. And there's also an element on the nose on this that really strongly reminds me of red wine, like a deep red wine, like a Syrah or a Cabernet, or something of that nature, a Merlot, a deep dark red wine. It smells very nice. There's a lot of complexity to it, a lot of layering, and it is quite pungent. Yeah, so it's got this very vinous quality to it, in tandem with the whiskey, in tandem with the sour and the tart, and also with that underlying tutti frutti. So it's a very interesting mixture of aromas, but it smells very nice. I'm not sure exactly what to expect when I jump into the flavor profile, but it smells fantastic. So let's just jump right in, take our first sip, and see what this one's about. Take one. Ooh, big beer. Big, bold, pungent. Yeah, this is a big one, guys. This is very big. Some sours are bigger than others. This is one that's leaning on that upper echelon big side. So massively pungent. In fact, you might have seen my eye squint. Normally that's from my set lights. I have very sensitive eyes. So apologize if I'm always squinting in my reviews. But this one is the pungency of the sour and the tart. It's mouth-puckeringly sour and tart. It really is an intensity of sour and tart up front. That's the first thing that hits you. It will make you twist your face up in a good way. It's very pungent. The next thing that I got behind that was the whiskey barrel. It's clear that it's been barrel aged, and it's clear that it's whiskey, but I gotta say, it's not over the top, and it doesn't override the underlying beer itself, which I think something as complex and interesting as a sour beer is, I'm actually really glad. So this barrel aging that they did with this beer is really an added bonus. It's just another thing into the mix that makes this beer what it is. but it's not overriding the base beer itself. The clear character of this dark sour ale really comes through, and then the whiskey barrel is just this ancillary thing on the side. It's just another element, another aspect. It's not taking center stage, as can often happen with barrel-aged beers. And I gotta say, I really, really love that about it. That to me screams an excellent balance. What they did, I don't know how long they left it in the Leopold barrels. I would guess shorter than a year, maybe even shorter than 6 months, but it does impart a really nice aroma and flavor to the party as well. But it is clear at its heart, this beer is a story about the underlying sour dark ale itself, and it is superb. So we're going to jump back in. We're going to get our second sip. There's a lot of data to process here, but on my first sip, I really, really enjoyed what I got. So on the second sip, I'm going to pick this back apart. I'm going to try to clue into this malt bill and see if there's any other key elements that I missed. And then we will talk about the balance as a total, and we will talk about the finish. But on first sip, it's absolutely brilliantly done. A fantastic sour. I'm really glad I got my hands on this one. So take two. Ooh, very sour, very tart. The word astringent would not be out of line here. So you get that mouth puckering tart and sour up front. You get that nice whiskey note that comes in right behind it. Then it does open up into these kind of classic back end flavors that you get on many sours. Now this is a Brettanomyces sour. There's only slight elements of funkiness in this one. I think that maybe there would be more if it were not whiskey barrel aged, but I think that's kind of overshadowing the essence of funk that may be in here. Some people love it, some people hate it. Either way, it's not particularly pronounced. There's a subtle suggestion of it, but it's not front and center. The next thing I can say about this beer is I got some aromas that reminded me of a nice red wine. There are absolutely flavor elements that also remind me of red wine. It could be tannins, what tastes like tannins in a wine, making their way in the beer glass from some chemical or molecule mixture that's in here, but it does absolutely put me in mind of the back end of a red wine or maybe even a port wine. And this is very nice. In terms of the malt bill, really what's coming out of this is on this darker side, it feels richer. Aside from the fact it's a higher ABV, there's something inherent about this that just feels like a richer sour beer drinking experience, as most are lighter. They're on the kind of lighter end of the spectrum with those lighter malts. These darker malts that they used in here really does liven it up. And yeah, you can't quite pick out the same subtlety of flavor that's brought to the table, say as you could in something like a brown ale or a porter or a stout, because of that souring effect. But there is a very discernible, noticeable difference in the richness of the beer as a whole. And on the back end, there is a little bit of a grain granola-like quality. It doesn't taste caramelly. It's not like caramelized roasted malts. There's no suggestions of cacao or coffee, but there is an underlying roasted granola kind of grainy sense on the back end that you don't typically get in, say, a normal, lighter colored sour. So clearly these darker malts are doing something to this beer package as a whole, aside from just the appearance factor. And it's very, very nice. This is a rich sour beer. It's a big sour beer. It's bold, it's in your face, but if I'm talking strictly of the balance, I think that they just nailed it with this one here. The whiskey barrel, it's present on the nose, it's present on the palate, but it's not getting in the way of letting this dark sour ale be its own star. The beer itself is the star of the show. The whiskey barrels are just the added bonus on top of the beer drinking experience, and it's absolutely fantastic. And again, I'm going to come back to these darker malts and the richness it has. While you're not picking out ribbons of caramel and cacao and coffee like you would do in many different dark beer styles that include these dark malts. In this one, that underlying richness it brings to the table really does make the beer a much bigger beer drinking experience overall. And I'm not just talking about the ABV, I mean the actual experience of drinking the beer, how it sits on you, the layers and flavoring of the layers, as well as the nose. I mean, this is just a big, complex sour, and I think they got a home run with this one. Now the finish. There is one thing of note on this sour beer that is a deviation from the norm, and that is this one does not give me any dryness on the palate at all. That's not a negative, it's not a positive, it's not requisite of a sour, although it is typical of a sour. But I am not getting that on this beer. And frankly, I think that this beer is better off for that fact because it feels a lot wetter, a lot rounder, a lot fuller on the palate. And it also does a better job of coating these flavors around, which in tandem, aside from the sensory experience of the finish, the flavor side, it has a big impact. This is barrel aged, and yes, there is some lingering light whiskey note on the back of the palate that does last way longer than your typical sour. But in particular, what's lingering on here is the underlying kind of qualities that make up this malt bill, plus the souring and the tart. It's quite big, it's quite in your face, it's quite pungent, and it does last way longer than your typical sour. This is a home run of a sour ale for my money, and I am so glad I got my hands on this. This is a really good one, guys. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now we're going to get this beer ranked. This was Crooked Stave Artisan Beer Project's Nightmare on Brett, a dark sour ale that's been whiskey barrel aged. This one clocks in at 9.6% ABV, and Crooked Stave is based in Denver, Colorado. So there's only two categories that this beer didn't get a perfect score. This was just a really extremely well done dark sour ale. Frankly, I was most impressed on this beer by the overall balance of what they did with it. The whiskey barrel came through in the aroma, and it also came through in the flavor profile, but it didn't override, it didn't take over the underlying base beer itself. And not only was it hugely pungently sour and tart up front, but it had tons of layers of complexity, especially coming out of this malt bill. That's where I was most impressed. It was really rich, and the dark side of this sour ale, the darker malts really came through, as well as everything else in this beer. It was extremely well done. So let's jump straight to the two categories that did not get a perfect score. The first of those was the body. Sour beers are not typically going to have a super huge body, but this was pushing 10% ABV. This was certainly well above average for the fact that it's a sour in this ABV range, but not quite perfect. The body gets an 8 out of 10. For the mouthfeel was a similar story, but there is an asterisk here. It's not a detractor really, but it is a deviation from the norm that there was no drying at all on the palate. So you would typically find that on the mouthfeel. But overall, I thought that the general resistance to it was almost picture perfect. Take those two into account, still well above average, but not quite top tier. I did give the mouthfeel an 8 out of 10 as well, which leaves a perfect 10 out of 10 in the remaining 8 categories. That's aroma, taste, finish, head and retention, appearance, balance, feeling/intangible, my subjective thoughts category, and example of style, which does bring the total score on Crooked Stave Artisan Beer Project's Nightmare on Brett to a 96 out of 100. Guys, this was top tier. This is easily one of the best sours I've had in recent memory. Get a lot of fruited sours these days, plenty of them out in the marketplace, but somebody that brings out just a base sour beer, then decides to go the dark malt route, then on top of that, have Brettanomyces, and then added on top of that whiskey barrel, and to have everything be completely cohesive, everything work perfectly together, all of the underlying elements have their own voice, both in the aroma and the flavor profile. That's a work of art. This was an exceptional sour beer. If you're a big sour beer fan, I do highly recommend this one. I am very, very glad I got my hands on it. I did get mine, again, from Tavour. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.